Okay, so good evening, everyone, both in our Zoom and also in Facebook platform. Welcome to our inaugural HA TikTok series organized by Harmony Center, also known as HA. My name is Liana and I will be your host as well as your moderator tonight. So firstly, let me share briefly about introduction about the HA TikToks. So inspired by wanting to explore how can experts and faith communities collaborate and come together to address and work towards common issues affecting everyone, Harmony Center introduced the HA TikToks this year as we gather experts from respective fields and faith representatives together to talk about socio-religious and contemporary issues that tick them. For a start, we have chosen the main theme, Navigating Safe Space, Strengthening Faith and Family Ties in COVID-19 to kickstart the series. This is also to tie in with the current pandemic and how can we find strength in faith and family ties as we move on to proceed phase 3, hopefully soon. Tonight in our first episode, we'll be addressing on the topic family and conversation, living with faith in the new norm. Just to set the context, we have seen many incidents happen from pre-COVID to circuit breaker till now. And in Singapore, business operations are slowing down, retrenchment figures are increasing, working routines disrupted, and schools had to adapt to online learning immediately. Families grapple to adapt to co-working arrangement while attending to home-based learning for their children all under one roof. And at one point of time, worshipping places had to close its doors too. And also based on the Straits Times article on the 19th of August 2020, it is stated that during the circuit breaker period, calls to the Samaritans of Singapore hotline rose from 3,826 in March to 4,319 in April and 4,265 in May. The April and May figures are about 30 to 35% higher than a year ago. On top of this, the survey conducted by the National University Health Systems Mind Science Center found that 61% of those working from home reported feeling stress, compared with 53% of frontliners. We also see some incidents which insinuate racist and xenophobic behaviors manifest during this pandemic. As COVID's threat will possibly remain for a long period of time, how can everyone play a role to help our family members to make sense of this new norm? How can faith serve as a coping mechanism for family to find strength and build resilience? How can one create a safe space to discuss social struggle with our family members? And what can be done to encourage families to be compassionate and exercise empathy towards others? So tonight, I would like to introduce to you our two speakers. So the first one, we have Dr. Matthew Matthews. Dr. Matthew Matthews is the head of IPS Social Lab, a Center for Social Indicator Research and a Senior Research Fellow at Institute of Policy Studies, National University of Singapore. To date, Matthews has been involved in over 50 research projects using both quantitative and qualitative methods to examine race, religion, immigrant integration, family, aging, and poverty. Matthews' work on religion includes regular surveys on religious practice and belief and how this shape a range of attitudes such as prejudice to those of other religious backgrounds. Matthews currently sits on several boards and panels, including onepeople.sg and Families for Life Council. And the next speaker that we have is Mr. Sarabjit Singh. So Mr. Sarabjit Singh currently serves as the president of the Young Sikh Association, or YSA. At the YSA, Sarabjit organizes various platforms with his team for youth in the community. These include the YSA Racial Harmony Football Tournament, YSA Ministerial Dialogues, and the Huaish Lecture Series. And Sarabjit was also one of the editors of the SG50 publication, Singapore at 50, 56, and their contributions as part of the commemorative projects endorsed by the Ministry of Community, Culture and Youth. In 2019, Sarabjit was shortlisted as a nominee for the Straits Times Singaporean of the Year Award. So the sharing by our two speakers will be based on the key questions that is being displayed here, as you can see. So without further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker, Dr. Matthew Matthews, to do your sharing. Welcome, Dr. Matthews.
Let me share my screen, and I think this should work. All right, hi. Good evening. First, thank you, Liana, for inviting me and for Harmony Center. It's a great privilege to be part of this new series that you have put together, and I think it's so timely and important, especially the times that we're in. I'm glad that there are people from different backgrounds who are wanting to think a little bit more about the issues to do with both religious practice, but also how we can build inclusive and strong communities together. I want to talk a little bit about some broad issues to do with social trust in this fight against the pandemic and some of the issues that come with that. I have taken note of some of the questions that the team has put together, and I'm trying to share my quick thoughts here. And I'll give more time for the discussions and the Q&A, because I think that's probably a great time for us to discuss matters. Let me start off by talking about what happens during pandemics. One of the big issues that have happened is a reduction of social trust, which happens during crisis.
Accessibility options.
All kinds of crises, bring about the reduction of social trust. Social trust, whenever you see a threat, as human beings, our natural form and our natural, proclivity is to try to protect ourselves. This is very human. And all throughout time, if you look at the last 10, 20 years, you can look at different kinds of crisis spots, different kinds of threats, whether it's a health crisis or a crisis that came out because of something else, economic recessions, for instance. We do see that there's a tendency to protect oneself and not think about the other. We've always have trust for people who are more similar to ourselves, people in our own community, people in our own family. These are people that we consider as being someone who is worthy of our trust. Other people, we have to be very careful about them because we don't know that they will do something bad to us. So in times of social crisis or crisis of any sort, the tendency is to isolate from those who are perceived to be threatening. Some people are going to be labeled as potentially the source of some trouble. And if I want to protect myself, I want to protect my family, I have to keep far away from them. And this is clearly in the case when we have crisis which goes at the heart of our social relations. Other crisis, economic crisis, it's, people are able to mix freely and mingle and talk. But in this crisis, you really have an issue because one of the measures to deal with this pandemic is really to distance ourselves from other people in terms of physical distance. And so that complicates the whole matter. And now we have very little ways of trying to reduce some of the tension. And think about many other things that we have to do. For instance, the fact that we have to wear masks, very, very important thing to do. But because we wear masks, we can't see the other's facial expression, feeling the warmth, the smiles. You don't see that. And so then it's easy sometimes to begin to conjure all kinds of worries and fears about the other. So this issue about the pandemic and all the threats that it has posed on our social fabric have been discussed, not just in Singapore, but all over the world. During the season, I put out about like 3 opinion pieces just on this area with my colleagues, just to highlight the fact that it was something of such an important, so much importance. I mean, right at the start of it in February, we already saw how the pandemic was causing some kind of distrust and concern, not just in Singapore, but many other parts of the world, even in Vancouver, in Canada, and countries which generally, there's a history of immigration. They understand to try to be multicultural. Yet, when the pandemic set, there were concerns about, for instance, Asians or Chinese, and there were concerns about whether they would be the nexus of the spread of virus. And then, of course, with that comes all kinds of other discriminatory type of treatment. So very early, we started talking about that, knowing that this is such an issue. The importance about building social trust, and the fact that during this season, it is very, very common for people to begin to go into a place of panic, where they begin to look at the surrounding around and saying that, hey, there must be people who might be causing trouble. In fact, in a study that was done by two academics, one from Indonesia and one from Malaysia, and they studied Twitter posts. They studied thousands of Twitter posts in Malaysia and Indonesia. We don't have an equivalent study published right now in Singapore, but they did this, and they noticed that a lot of Twitter posts was focused on blaming others for potentially spreading the virus. Even in Singapore, we know that this happened. There were seasons where churches, for instance, were known as places where there were outbreaks of the virus. And so then, in communities, in workplaces, people started asking, can I just check what church do you go to? Is it okay or not? But I'm a bit concerned. So there were concerns about that. People were worried about, that perhaps. Then, of course, when the outbreak happened in Malaysia and it involved a religious community, there were other concerns around. People were worried about Muslims, for instance, and maybe they could spread. Then, of course, there was the issue about the migrant workers, and there were all kinds of concerns about migrant workers because and in fact, there was somebody who actually wrote about the fact that migrant workers should blame themselves because they are not hygienic, and that's why that's led to the spread of the virus. So many attempts to try to find people to blame for the pandemic. This led Minister Grace Fu, who was formerly Minister in charge of MCCY, to actually say that COVID-19 has really caused some stress on our social fault lines. And the fact that there are reactions that people have. And, we see this continue even now when it comes to those who are immigrants to Singapore and foreigners. And there are concerns, many regards, concerns about the fact that they might not be cooperative, they may not follow the rules, they may do things which would be adverse to the rest of us. And then this stereotype about another group being responsible, another group which might cause trouble. Must remember that to start off with, many of these pandemics work against existing fault lines. Very glad that in Singapore, over the years, and at this study with IPS and onepeople.sg, we looked at a very large number of Singaporeans, and we asked people about the case of SARS. Next time we'll have to change it to COVID, but this was we completed the second wave, just last year. And we noticed that trust had gone up. We were able to trust more and more people of other ethnic groups and also other religious groups. But yet you still see that there is a gap. Our trust levels are not all that high. We do trust, but we do trust generally some and not all. And so, of course, that is a concern. So in a state when you've got a pandemic, then there are going to be fault lines which are already existing, but they are further exacerbated. The fault line, the pandemic does that, and not just the pandemic. Now, the economic concerns that come from the pandemic continue to make us very concerned about different groups of people. So there are all kinds of fault lines, and these fault lines are likely to widen unless we do something about it. So there are things that we can do. One thing I believe that we can do as families, and families are very, very powerful because we have a group of people who really accept and who listen to one another. Now, most families in Singapore have good relationships, and there's a certain sense of trusting one's family. Family is trusted for information, for support, for insights. And it's within the family that we can correct misperceptions. There are all kinds of misperceptions that come out. Misperceptions that come because of misinformation. So during the pandemic, if you know that, there are all kinds of chat groups and websites, and people pass messages, and some of those messages do not help. They continue to exacerbate fault lines. They point out that particular groups are the troublemaking community. And this is where we who have a little bit more knowledge about things, and we who understand about the power of stereotypes, should be there in our families to try to correct those misinformation. Getting people to go to proper sources. We realize in Singapore that maybe people may not trust one another, but Singaporeans do trust authority figures, they do trust government, they do trust mainstream media, they put some trust in many of our institutions. Directing people to the good sources of information, which oftentimes disprove many ideas which are xenophobic, which are discriminatory, and they show that no, it's not some of the allegations are not correct. And this is a time in our families that we need to emphasize the value of social solidarity, whatever way, whether it's to our children, to our elders, to our siblings. The idea that there is an important part that as Singaporeans we can pull together. And if we work together, then the tough times will be overcome. It has a positive effect for all of us. There's a danger for us to alienate one group because that would be the group which would then become the weakest link, and that would be a trouble for all of us. So it is actually to our own personal advantage and our family's advantage for us to emphasize social solidarity during this time. So if people begin to understand some of this and we explain it, it makes a big difference. And remember, families are very powerful. We have the power to explain and help. In fact, one of our surveys that we did, we realized that over the years, I mean, some of our older groups which may not be so well versed in school and may not have the same kind of multicultural education that some of us who are younger have, we know that some of their attitudes have changed primarily because younger people have increasingly tried to, we use the word re-socialize their parents and their grandparents and help their grandparents and their parents understand the value of being inclusive and the value of respecting other groups and learning to remove some of the myths which are commonly perpetuated. There's also a big role that religious groups can do in this season. And I mean, I guess some faces here are familiar, including Liana's face. Many look to religion to provide a moral compass. And religious groups have great power to make salient the virtues of embracing the other, love, kindness, compassion, consideration. In fact, they've done studies which have shown that during crisis points or I mean before, after, if religious groups were just to put out statements reminding their devotees, their worshippers, their congregants about some of the virtues which are spoken about their religion, that itself, if people reflect on that, that itself has a way of reducing some of our intolerance, some of our animosity and anger, because all our world religions talk about the importance of love and compassion, about kindness and forgiveness. So it's so powerful when we actually would use some of that, whether it's our scripture and our tradition, to help to point out this and at the same time take a firm stand against what would be xenophobic and discriminatory. And I think if we do some of that, I think we will be able to see a great pulling together of resources, and our families together can do much better in this crisis point. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Matthew Matthews, for very insightful sharing earlier. I wouldn't want to comment much now because I want to give more time, especially during the Q&A when we can have a much more conversation later. But now what I would like to do is to invite our next speaker, Mr. Sarabjit, to share your insights from the faith perspective. Yeah, Mr. Sarabjit, please. So, just give me a moment.
Sure. Everyone's able to hear me, or Liana, could you just confirm that I'm audible?
Okay. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Liana. And hi, everyone. I hope everyone's had a dinner already, but if you haven't, hopefully soon, because I don't intend to take too long. And of course, just before I begin, I'd like to quickly also thank the Harmony Center for getting us all together to talk about and have this important conversation, when it comes to the ways that we can respond, especially given crisis situations, how we can navigate safe space, strengthening faith and family ties in COVID-19. These are all very important aspects and constitute the response that will help society get by. Help me with the next slide, Liana. Okay. So just very quickly, Liana did a very quick introduction already. So I volunteer with the Young Sikh Association. Thanks. And if we don't get a chance to interact today, you can just connect with us on social media as well. My take is slightly different. I appreciate, of course, Dr. Matthew Matthews' broader sort of insight on trends, certain developments as well during this crisis. But you know, when Liana and the Harmony Center approached me to talk a little bit about faith, and I'm obviously a Sikh, and my faith is guided by my religion, Sikhism. But it did make me reflect quite deeply. You know, how has my faith helped guide me, influenced me, and enabled me to also, perhaps if I were to put it across, it would be, how am I able to manage all these, the inundation, for example, of information, even the dramatic changes. I mean, just the example Dr. Matthew Matthews shared about wearing masks. These were not to be taken lightly. I think all of us realize that they have quite serious implications on our day-to-day lives. And I thought that actually when it came to faith, many of us would intuitively think that, yes, faith is something that we can rely on. It's something that gives us strength. Actually, I found upon, you know, a bit more deeper thinking, introspection and reflection, actually it was a bit of a source of tension for me as well. On the one hand, yes, faith can be a source of strength, but it can also cause you a little bit of anguish. And I'd like to share with you a little bit about my personal examples, you know, with my family as well, when it came to faith. So yes, exactly this. Thanks for the next slide. It can be a source of anguish. At least this. Oops, can we go back? Yeah. So for me, as I reflected on this, it can be a source of anguish. Faith can also be a source of strength. It can guide us in some of the service that we were able to do, you know, especially in a crisis situation. And I'd like to end off by sharing this concept of Chardi Kala with all of you. That is quite core to our religion in Sikhism, but it is not just a concept in terms of the religious aspect, but it truly guides a lot of the ways we think, our attitudes, and how we as individuals, as I cannot stress enough, respond to various situations. Next slide. So faith is a source of anguish, and I'm going to give this example. You know, I'm a bit cheeky. I didn't really ask my sister if I could share these pictures. So I hope if she's watching online on Facebook, sorry, Sonia, I took the liberty and license to do this without seeking permission. But I know you'll forgive me. But you know, this on the surface of it, this looks like a very happy, joyous occasion. It was, in fact, indeed. So this is my sister's wedding. Of course, we were planning her wedding late last year. And, you know, when COVID struck, obviously everything had to, I mean, first there was a lot of, you know, everything was up in the air. We didn't know whether we could proceed with my sister's wedding. My baby sister, by the way, she's younger than me. And this became a source of anguish simply because in a Sikh sort of family, and even in mine, the temple ceremonies, each of these are very, very significant. And we were struggling with, you know, do we proceed with this? And if I'm absolutely honest with you, even within our home, there were conversations about, you know, how is it possible that if you, for example, want to talk about a country, you know, how is it possible that such a serious virus, for example, could spread to this extent and to land us in such a situation? And if you ask me, again, these stemmed from the faith that we had. You know, it was important for us to follow our religious sort of instruction and the way of marriage. But again, this story does have a happy ending. We did decide, you know, despite that initial anguish, to proceed with Sonia's wedding. And we had a smaller function. And, you know, at the end of it all, I told my wife and I told Sonia as well and her husband, that actually this was so much more meaningful, although we weren't able to do it in the religious traditional way in the temple, but actually having that intimate setting made it very, very special for all of us. So yeah, this was an example of where, you know, actually faith was caused a little bit of anguish, and talking, you know, the conversations my family had. Definitely we were, you know, in some instances we did fall into that trap of, you know, attributing and possibly even blaming the situation on others. But on hindsight, actually, we realized there was no need to, because we ultimately had a very memorable wedding function for Sonia. Next, please. Yeah. So I just quickly wanted to share that, yes, for traditional Sikh weddings, every ritual has very deep significance. And, both of the families are expected to go to the Gurdwara Sahib. The Gurdwara Sahib would be the equivalent of a Sikh temple for the Sikhs. And where the Ardars is recited, this is a significant sort of prayer. And the Lava Fere, these are 4 rounds that we take around the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, our holy scripture. And there are these final prayers where there's a distribution of Guru Prasad. So all of these, as simple as they may be, are actually very, very significant and important. Just to give you a bit of context as well. So I personally am in a mixed marriage where my wife was a non-Sikh, or rather is a non-Sikh. But even then, it was important for me at a very personal level that we did this ceremony. So that's just to stress to you and impress upon you how significant the Lava Fere for Sikh families, where 2 young people are getting married is. Next, please. But as I said, faith can also be a source of strength. So this is the other aspect of that sort of tension that faith brings, especially during times of crisis. Next. And let me elaborate. So earlier this year, in the month of April, this was, pretty fairly early on in the circuit breaker period, or rather, sorry, in the middle of it sometime. Yes, sometime in the middle of it. So the Sikhs celebrated this festival, or a significant event for the Sikh community known as Vaisakhi. And this year, if I'm not mistaken, it was on the 13th of April. And Vaisakhi is significant because it was the formalization of the Khalsa by our 10th Guru Gobind Singh Ji. And, how the Khalsa was formalized was through this sort of request by our Guru to have volunteers who are willing to, sacrifice their lives for the Guru. In fact, he asked very directly if, I could get volunteers who would give me their head, which means he would take a sword and he would literally decapitate them. But obviously he didn't do that. He was just trying to see the bravery of individuals who, decided to follow him. And there were 5 individuals. And I bring this about because in the COVID situation in circuit breaker, where there was so much uncertainty, actually this aspect of faith, celebrating significant religious community events and the meanings behind these, I felt that yes, while we could not have the full-blown Vaisakhi affair, but the way the community, not just in Singapore, but in our neighborhood, even around the world, how we were able to creatively turn this around and still get down to the fundamental meanings and significance of celebrations like these. I thought it was a wonderful turning point when, there was an expectation that, celebrations will be very muted. We won't have that live, the fanfare and whatnot. But actually, I would say that it turned out to be one of the most memorable Vaisakhis for me. Next slide, please. So as I shared with you, what happened was we decided to do the community. This was actually launched by, one of the initiatives during Vaisakhi was launched by an Asia Samachar, which is a sort of a regional news outlet for the Sikh community. And they decided to do this where families would come together. We would still dress up as we would go to the temple. Of course, yes, we would stay at home, but we would record Vaisakhi messages for each other. So, although that physical disconnect was there between communities, right, or rather members of community, I thought, how this online sort of orientation or configuration was, it actually brought families together. But it was also important for the families to wish members of the community a happy Vaisakhi. And this, in a very curious way, I can't quite put my finger on this, but it was still a very meaningful Vaisakhi for precisely this reason, where we had individuals from our community, every individual, not just community leaders, for example, but your friends, your neighbors, people you grew up with. It was wonderful to see how many people supported initiatives such as Vaisakhi Indoor to ensure that we still celebrate, appreciate the meaning and richness of religious events such as this. And ultimately, I think it strengthens faith as well and strengthens our resolve. Next, please. And of course, faith as a guide in service. Next, yeah. So this is where I'm probably going to get a little more to the crux of our discussion here, where this is not unique to the Sikh community. Of course, I think most religious communities do sort of ascribe and believe strongly in this, where service before self is the motto of not just the Sikh community, but like I said, it's not something that's unique to the Sikh community, but even other communities. And if you look historically, the Sikh gurus, so this is a wonderful article that was shared around this time. So the Sikh guru service to the Sikh can be a lesson for today's pandemic, in precisely because they showed us, they modeled the way on how or what would be a suitable or a desired response when it comes to a crisis situation where you would find more individuals struggling, for example. Next, please. So these are some historical anecdotes and accounts where, it started very early on from our first guru when during his travels, they were looking for shelter. And the only house, or rather the only place they could find and that would let them in was the house of a leper. And the guru entered the leper's home and also bandaged his wounds and of course eventually managed to cure him. Now, most of us in such a situation would probably not even accept and just sleep outdoors, for example. But there was significant humility in this gesture. So this lesson or this historical account actually impresses upon us values of humility. And we have other instances such as our fifth Guru, Guru Arjan Dev Ji, who built a leprosy home while getting a tank dug at Taran, another village or site in Punjab. And then moving on, our seventh Guru, Guru Har Rai, and he was just he was able to also cure individuals who were ill and so on and so forth. And actually the most compelling and one that resonated with me, next slide, is of another guru, our eighth guru, who's just a little boy at that time. In fact, he was also affectionately referred to as Bal Guru, which translates into a young boy, but also, of course, considered a religious leader. So he arrived in Delhi and he found that there was a lot of individuals who were suffering from leprosy. And he, in fact, decided to, go in and assist. But more significantly, there's this belief by very devout Sikhs that, in fact, he took upon the suffering of the people. Now, what can we take away from this? Actually, I mean, in a crisis situation, in a COVID situation, actually, if you were to ask me, this kind of behavior was really modeled by a lot of individuals who are on the front lines. So it's not the case that, I mean, in this account, of course, the guru is described as being able to heal, presumably through powers that he may have and divine intervention of sorts. But if you think about it, what our frontliners, many of them are doing today by putting themselves at risk, healing, assisting individuals who are sick. This to me is another example of, having faith or understanding faith in a certain dimension from my community, but seeing it in action, seeing it unfold by and large in Singapore society. And that's why this particular historical account really resonated with me. Next, please. And almost to the end of my sharing, even at the YSA itself, the Young Sikh Association, we are primarily comprised of young individuals in our community. We were also able to launch a sort of an initiative during this period where we read certain stories that would lift morale, and in exchange, individuals would donate some funds, which we would then go on and buy some medical supplies for organizations such as, the Lee Amoy Home, if some of you may be familiar, was one of the first old folks homes that was identified as having a COVID positive patient and resident. But the Sikh community generally responded again in very quickly. We were able to mobilize resources, for example, by also giving out langar, which is vegetarian meals that you would typically find at the Gurdwara or Sikh temples. And these were some of the ways that our faith guided us during this time. Next, please. So this brings me down to, if we talk a little bit about the faith that's specific to the Sikh community, what is this concept that would guide a lot of our actions, our attitudes, and our thoughts? And the other thing is this concept of Chardi Kala. Let me just quickly share with you one of the lines which is in our significant sort of prayer in our Ardas, right? Nanak Naam Chardi Kala Tere Pane Sarbat Dapalai just simply translates to Nanak. With Naam, that means meditation, comes Chardi Kala, and with your blessings, peace for everyone. So what is Chardi Kala? In a very simplistic way, or the sort of mass understanding of or interpretation of Chardi Kala. It just means to have a positive attitude and to be joyous, for example. But I think actually this COVID situation would have impressed and made many individuals within the Sikh community realize that actually the Chardi Kala can be broadened to encompass a lot of things. Next slide, please. So in a COVID situation, we saw instances of gratitude, fortitude, courage, discussions of ethics, and even responding, thinking about how we could go about our affairs ethically, virtue, honesty. You know, the challenge with the English language is that it can never quite truly capture concepts or words that describe certain values and belief systems, or how belief systems from other communities. And I think this is truly the case when it comes to Chardi Kala, because it truly means so many things. And, you know, Dr. Matthew shared a little bit about the discrimination that did happen. I think while that was the case, our community's take on it is actually, I suspect as well that on a personal level, that there was more good than bad that happened. Unfortunately, though, that it's the negative that sometimes gets magnified and amplified. But if we were to really think and reflect, and you know, not just what we came across in the news, but also our own personal experiences. You know, a stranger giving you a mask, putting sanitizer bottles in our lifts. All of these are demonstrations of Chardi Kala. And I strongly believe that actually during this COVID-19 crisis, we saw more positive and good in society than the negative. And I'd like to end on that note.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Sarabjit. That was very refreshing. I thought, how do I put it? I thought it was very genuine of you to put it up front. You know, at times you can't you can't deny that sometimes you do feel that faith gives you a certain expectation that adds a little bit of pressure as you try to find yourself in attaining that serenity and calmness, especially during the pandemic. And I thought that was like wonderfully shared, and especially after Dr. Matthew Matthews has also shared from the perspective, more from the social religious perspective of how we can strengthen the family ties, especially looking into fake information and fake news that we can look into together and discuss further as a family and not just as an individual. Okay, so next segment, what I would like to do is actually to invite our two discussants to join us and also to share their thoughts and reflections based on the sharing done by the speakers. So tonight we have Ms. Jennifer Goh and also Master Adrian Long. So Ms. Jennifer Goh, she is a member of the Association of Psychotherapists and Counselors and has about 30 years of experience in the social service sector and in the community engagement. She's also the co-founder of Blossom World Society, a youth charity with IPC status since 2008. In her work, Jennifer has organized numerous public forums and has personally conducted training in many youth development camps. Jennifer also served as the youth advisor for Youth Ambassador Roses of Peace, represented Singapore at the ASEAN Youth Conference on Interracial and Religious Harmony, and was appointed member of IMDA Art Consultative Panel in 2018. She was one of the recipients of the Friends of MCCY Award 2019, and she is currently lecturer and head of Public Relations Department, Grassroots and Government under the BW Monastery. An active member of IRCC Admiralty, she participated in organizing many community and social harmony related events. So welcome, Ms. Jennifer. And the next one that I would like to introduce is Master Adrian Long. So Master Adrian Long is an entrepreneur of a company specialized in information technology and robotic solution. And he has been an active volunteer in the community for the past 20 years. He was ordained as Taoist Prince under the Cheng Yi Doctrine in year 2012. And as a Taoist Master, he is currently volunteering his service with the Taoist Federation Singapore and a committee member of various temples, association, and community organizations, which include Seng Hong Welfare Service, Interreligious Organization, also known as IRO, and as chairman of Sengkang South IRCC. He has also involved in delivering religious-related dialogue and talks in various IRCC events, and sharing with community grassroots leaders about Taoism under the National Community Leadership Institute, blessing prayers during some interfaith event. And he is also a licensed solemnizer with the Registrar of Marriage. Now, welcome, Master Adrian Long. So before I invite them to share, just to give a little nudge to our participants and audiences, both in the Zoom platform as well on Facebook. If you are viewing, I hope you're still there, and I would like to invite you to drop by your questions and comments in both Zoom and our Facebook platform, so I can pick your questions, yeah? So if you have a question that you want to address to any specific speakers for today, do specify their names. So let me invite Ms. Jennifer to give your thoughts about the sharing earlier. Ms. Jennifer, please.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and the religious representative here. And I think, first of all, thank you to both speakers for the informative and insights of how life is like during the past few months. And I have something that maybe you can share more. We are honestly facing a new unknown, and this current situation seems like much more dire than before. The feeling of fear, which both of you have described, was further magnified and expressed through the increase of like we notice like in the community stocking up of daily necessities by some of the public, and displaying underlying anxiety. Although the matter of the virus increasingly took stage in all media outlets, and one may also be reminded that in the last 8 months, there were all types of challenges as well, and some other disaster around the rest of the world. To grapple with all these torrents of sudden negative news and topping off with fake news, which just now Dr. Matthew have mentioned, I'm glad that one's belief system, like the personal life that Sarajit has shared with us, help us to overcome some difficult moments and face it calmly. So from the two speakers' presentation, I also observed that there are many ways that ones and family members can handle the situation, and Dr. Matthew mentioned that there's tendency to protect ourselves, and also the first one who comes is to protect someone that is worthy, trustworthy, that is our families. So it's very wonderful to learn that how families come together and have creative way to practice faith and religion. Then my question is that did you like pick up or there's any information for us that how in the society family members approach in this matter? Is there any change like in the beginning, and then later after a few months later, is their approach has their approach changed? So maybe the two speakers can share more on this, and also the concern of foreigners and migrants. And I wonder if there's like sufficient, whether is it sufficient encouragement for someone to step forward to talk about their struggles, as emotion can be overwhelmed. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of internalization during these periods, and in creating safe space and conversation who is struggling, because this is a tough time, and how we can cope with our daily life, living with faith and support. So is there any barrier for people who needs help? Yeah, generally that's my take on your both speakers sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jennifer. So I will let Master Adrian to give his sharing before I will let Dr. Matthews and also Sarabjit to respond to Ms. Jennifer's question. Yeah. So Master Adrian.
Yeah. Hey, thanks. It's a great opportunity to listen to the two speakers by sharing of the both the negative side and positive side of the when this pandemic events came to the world itself. one of the very heartening to see is actually in our perspective of most of our religious organizations and even the association and all these things. One of the things is that we are able to extend helps out not only in Singapore, but actually extended all the way out to overseas itself to help everyone. So this reflect very faithfully on the faith we have. Like in Taoism, our master always mentioned about the belief of the three treasures, compassion or love, vulgarity, and even humility or modesty. So in these aspects, we tends to in Tao Te Ching, actually they mentioned that we have to do what is right and not strive with others. And we see a very positive aspects of like a lot of people are trying to assist anyone in need and not causing harm to them. And also trying to restore our humility and do goods for the rest of the people. And being a very obedient so-called Singaporeans, in fact, we have do a very good actions for in line with the government. So this is in fact very well fit into one of the Taoist teaching that we encourage everyone not to work against the nature force, okay, but work with the natural force. So we try to keep things simple and also to resolve, revolve, and let the nature give a solution to every problem. So in natural fact, based on what we see from all these aspects itself, we thanks to actually all the ROs and even the RROs, even RCC and even the harmony centers and all things. They thanks to also thanks to follow the guidelines of what the authorities have been given. So this is a form of showing aspects of moving as a natural way in Taoism. So with that, it make our situations improve better, and then and the whole situation is being put into a control manner, which is now we are into the second phase. So we're waiting for the third phase to come, third opening phase to come. So as a form of what have Mr. Matthews have shared and Mr. Rajit Singh has shared, we constantly have to remind ourselves, have to be mindful of what other people think also, like the fake news and all that stuff, and how we actually try to overcome it. And we had to really review before we make a comments to the world or even the outside to everyone, to the public. Our personal comments, which sometimes may cause harm or hurts to other people. So in this aspects, we have to be mindful. And we also, I would like to share also from my perspective, we thanks to my family itself, we always share whatever news is being advertised in there or show in the press itself. And we try to analyze, and to the certain extent, we try to also understand what is the situation is all about. And we actually educate the children and all stuff, and try not to say wrong things to them, and have to mindful to them. I'm also grateful that my two sons also help very greatly into helping the community in all the social services to help all the people in needs, and even go to the extent of going to the dormitory which people are avoiding, or even hospital itself, to give appreciation card, or even some of the necessities of all the necessity things. So with this, in our faith itself, we recognize that mindfulness is vital in our daily life. So in natural aspects, we always encourage to check on our old, young, and also our spouse on their well-being constantly. Okay, so actually my take of the whole thing, basically just one statement. So as we navigate the ongoing challenge, so regardless of your faith, may I think that the faith continue to be with us. So no matter how much falls on us, let's be resilient. And then we try to focus our energy not on fighting the old. Whatever it past is past. But we had to build on the new so that we could sail together to a revisable horizon itself, and then to come up from this pandemic or even difficult situations. That's all I can share with this.
Okay. Thank you so much, Master Adrian. Thank you for that reflection. Yeah, it was very heartening to hear your personal stories about, how you also be able to at least experience and notice that, that initiative that was done by your children, because we've also heard some, some stories where before COVID, you hardly know or you hardly see, what some development or some progress within your family members, because, everyone's have a tight schedule and this and that. But to a certain extent, COVID has its own blessing. But I think apart from that, what we would like to see is also how we can enhance, find more better ways in creating more opportunities, especially in these difficult times, especially if we do have that privilege to help others and engage others as much as we can. Yeah. So thank you so much, Master Adrian. So if I can invite Dr. Matthews to respond to Jennifer's question.
Thank you very much. It was very heartening to hear what Sarabjit shared, and certainly what Jennifer and Master Adrian mentioned. It was very, very helpful perspectives. And, one of the beautiful things is that families have been going through this pandemic. If you think about the start of the pandemic, where there were a lot of uncertainties, a lot of things were not very clear. All you knew was that people were dying and COVID had spread seemingly uncontrollably in China, and then after a while it was moving, and people were all, the earlier stories were all stories of great horror, and everybody was just trying to make sense of it. And that's a season where sometimes our selfish nature comes in. We want to protect ourselves above everything else. Me, my family, that's the top thing. Everybody else, who cares about you, right? That tends to be the tendency. It's very human. Hopefully all our religious education would help us to do better, but the human tendency is always very strong, and I think that makes us kind of and so many of us would have spent our time dissing and being upset with countries and people and groups and all that. That's just very sadly now. I think that would probably have been the dinner table talk. I've got 3 children in school, so I have a sense of what goes on in school and hear some of the stories, and we pretty much hear the accusations that go on. The early stage, there were kids from who come from China, for instance, who are studying here, and how they become the brunt of much of the jokes or the humor or the upsetness, and things that, very fortunate, I think all of us as parents do and strive to do, is to stop our children and tell them, hey, that's not the way to do it, right? But of course it tends to be, but of course the tendency again is at that season when we are highly confused, not very sure, we tend to do everything to just protect ourselves. And that means including sometimes when you've got young children, you start telling them, okay, don't play with those kids because you don't know. All the things that are wrong, you end up telling them, right? Because you kind of worry about the spread of the virus. But I think what has shifted, if you look at the progression, and as there was a little bit more of understanding about the spread of the virus, what the virus was, what was needed to take care of oneself, the different kind of measures that came in the circuit breaker. I think we did come to a stage where there was a lot more of empathy creation. And of course, this was helped by a lot of communities in Singapore, right? Initiated by the government, initiated by the community, initiated by religious groups, where people were called to reflect. I think humanly, we don't reflect. Humanly, we are, most of us, just try to get on with our day-to-day routine. We don't stop and think and reflect until people call us to reflect. And then I think is where we've begun to have a lot more of these moments of empathy building, where we begin to start thinking about the migrant worker. We thought about the people in hospital. We start thinking about healthcare workers, and as you know, it's very clear, especially if you're parenting children who are younger. As part of your goal in life, is you want to build empathy in your children because it works for you as well, right? As a parent, because if they don't have any empathy for you, you'll have a very hard time parenting them as well. So all these were moments where I think many us parents used to be able to help their children to find some way of creating this sense of empathy. And in that process, because we need to do it, we ourselves develop some of that and have an understanding of why that is so important. So I think we have moved quite a bit that from where it was to what we are now. I think many of us have reflected and have put on much of what we know is important, and good values and virtues have triumphed at this season. My quick thoughts.
Thank you so much, Dr. Matthews. Sarabjit, you want to add on based on the question from Jennifer?
Yeah, wow, Jennifer, I mean, I think you really thought very deeply as well. And, just listening to you, several thoughts. I'm going to try and be succinct, okay? So you did talk quite a bit about the fears, anxieties, anger, that we saw. And, we try to, of course, what we see are the individuals' reactions when they experience such emotions, right? But we tend to not give too much attention to is, perhaps trying to deeply understand what could be the source of this fear, anxieties, and anger, and which I think Dr. Matthews perfectly captured in, that ability to empathize. And it is inadvertently the case that, yes, there would be some individuals who would be disproportionately impacted during a time of crisis. And for them, the struggles are so much more than, individuals like, for example, us, who have, especially in this instance, we have already access to technology. We can have conversations. And essentially what Harmony Center has done for us is to create that safe space to have a conversation. But, these things that we, again, no judgment here, but what we may take for granted may not be the case for many in our community. But I'd like to also, of course, come back to a more positive note. I think, one thing that COVID-19, again, despite it's a bit of an oxymoron or irony, despite that disconnect, that physical disconnect, my sense is that actually what COVID-19 has done has made us a little more human. And let me share why. On the one hand, those within our immediate families, I think for the majority of us, we are definitely having much deeper, longer conversations, sometimes perhaps even fighting more intensely with each other because we're all constrained at home. I mean, we're all stuck together at home. But regardless, I think fundamentally, Dr. Matthews also mentioned, he's got 3 kids and he's having those dinner table conversations. That has been one of the more wonderful and positive developments. I would also add to that, what has happened during COVID-19 is that actually a lot of us have started to first become aware and also think deeply about some of the other societal issues that do exist. For example, you would perhaps recall that there were reports of heightened or increase in domestic abuse, for example, when people were during the circuit breaker where movements were restricted. These were issues that a lot of young people, at least, and again, I don't have any empirical data for this, but these were issues that a lot of young people were not thinking all too seriously about, or even mental health, for example. But COVID-19 has really brought this to the fore. And again, I see this by and large as a positive development where young people, especially because that's my immediate area of work, are becoming a lot more sort of concerned and quite passionately so about issues in society such as this. I'm going to end off on this thing. We've talked about one of the C's so far, crisis, right? But there are actually 2 other C's that we can consider and bear in mind. In a crisis, there will be individuals who create, right? So it could be the case where people are disseminating, creating fake news, but there are also a lot of positive creations or creativity, which by and large help society come to terms, manage in a crisis situation. The second C would be choice. We all actually have quite a bit of choice when it comes to how we respond. For example, if we receive fake news, do we quickly send it out without actually perhaps taking that extra second to verify, is this information correct, so on and so forth. So there are these 3 C's that at least, or rather, okay, so 4 C's: COVID, crisis, creation, and choice. This has been the way I've tried to understand how this situation has unfolded for us.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sarabjit. That was very useful. Yeah, quite impressed to realize that you come with that tips. I think sometimes you are very overwhelming with, especially because of COVID, social media is almost in front of your face 24 hours. And as as you mentioned earlier, how it works, usually you get fake news, or all the sensationalized news tends to amplify more than news that carries on the highlight of, like, common good, and even the idea of compassion and empathy. People tend to like more of, like, those gossips or any tension that is being created, and then you start to see people having all these selfies, and see who will actually be the one to post first and get things viral, right? But I guess what you're trying to point out is that, amidst of those pandemic, how can we also include that positivity and put it in our mind, and make it into like a consistent principle that we can look into every now and then, so that we it helps us to continuously be hopeful. And actually that sort of like lead to a question that I have. I don't have I like to refer this to a specific speaker or discussants, but feel free to to comment on this. So my question is, when we talk about the pandemic, right, like in COVID-19, we've seen many narratives that sort of wanting to give you hope, and therefore the lines is always like, okay, we'll work on this together, we will emerge stronger, and everything will I wouldn't say everything will turn back to normal, because we are in the new normal, but it sort of said that until everything is being eradicated, until the virus is vanished, then once everything is done, and we are all back happy, we are back and contented. So I was wondering, would that be a kind of narrative that you would emphasize to your family as you have that conversation? Or would it be a narrative where you say, like, look, because of the uncertainty, I definitely don't know how and when will this thing end. Perhaps as a family, we have to see this as part of our ecology. It's that new norm where that virus may perhaps linger longer, but how we can also sustain or even strengthen the spirit of hope, the spirit of resilience longer as we also move into this new norm. Yeah. So that's my question. I was just wondering, personally with your family, which of this option would you take as you continue to help to uplift, the spirit of your family members? Because usually, family members of different generations have different goals or aspirations that they want to achieve, and hopefully everything is done. I just want to do this, or travel, or meet my buddies, my kaki kopis, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So perhaps if I don't know if maybe Jennifer, if you want to make some comment to that.
Well, I work full time in BW Monastery, but during this period, I and my fellow colleagues, we work from home. Yeah, and then when the stages progresses, then we have like, how many can go back, and team A, team B. So I think for during these circuit breakers, for me, my families, my work, and I'm a PR, and I have to do lecture, nothing changed. Okay, the work schedule go on. It's just that we have to see the computer more, and we are living in the same space with so many people under one roof. Even like using the toilet, who get nearer, sit nearest to the socket, we prioritize, and who gets to eat the breakfast first, because we are rushing for our online meeting or webinar, and who get to eat dinner first? I first, because I'm meeting you tonight, Yeah, I have some things that I have some commitments. So it's the understanding. And the BW Monastery taught us observe merits, appreciate kindness, OMAC. So when faced with this, I think it's very useful for me and my family. We need to consider from different perspectives. And we find that we become more understanding. For example, maybe your children, who are not schooling, Dr. Matthew, so that they are disturbing and they are demanding, but then you kind of like become more understanding. Hey, why are they behaving in this way? So during this stay home period, I think my faith, we organized, we met like Vesak Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day celebration. So we have online live streaming where we bring family members together, not only mentally, spiritually, but then physically they can sit together. And because we have games, we have quizzes, we have singing sessions, so they can come together. And also especially like during this period is Vesak retreat. So the monk and the nun, they are actually observing some rituals. So May to September, it's raining retreat. So they gave a lot of talks and Dharma related and non-Dharma related topics. It's helped to bring family close together. So I think just now Sarajit was sharing like creative ways that we can have for ourselves and our family members. And I like to quote from Bodhisattva, Santideva. He says that if there is a solution, then what needs is there for dejection? If there's no solution, then what point is there in dejection? So I find that this verse is very useful for me. I learned that if there's, if one have done what we can do, then my conscience is clear. So during this pandemic, I think we are encouraged to renew our relationship, some of which that we took for granted. Yeah, like from our parents. Yeah, so we close up the gaps, and by watching our speech, by our body, speech, and mind, we can see that, we cannot change that result of this matter, but we can change our perspective. Yeah, so this is how we can improve. I can improve my spiritual as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Jennifer. Like based on your what I hear from you is not so much that your emphasis is not so much about, okay, when everything ends, we're all back together and everything will be nice, or like, okay, let's be acceptance. It's more of that, but I think your emphasis is also about living in that moment and try to be, appreciative at that moment itself, and make and create that opportunity and make meanings to every single thing that you are experiencing. So you don't really have time to sort of like figure out when will this end or like when will this change, because you're trying to make the best of the opportunity as you go with your family. I thought that was very inspiring. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Okay, actually now is the Q&A session, but I thought before I actually pick some of the questions that we have here, I just can't resist, but I wanted to ask this to Dr. Matthew Matthews. I guess, like most of the Zoom webinar that we see Dr. Matthews, oftentimes you speak as an academician. So I'm very curious to know, because earlier you've mentioned about, noticing that when you have like children, and then because of this COVID, some of the children of, let's say, of a different identity, of that different race, has become the spotlight of a bully, or like, of being discriminated. I'm very curious, if you are to wear your hat as a father, how is it that you approach your children in discussing with that? I mean, like, in the seminar on the academic discourse, you would always share with us, these are the statistics, and help us to make that realization. But how would you help to make that realization for children? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Anna, for asking all these family-based questions. Actually, I'm on Families for Life Council, so by right, we're supposed to. One of our big things is about promoting family and values. But I think it's a very important question, Liana. I mean, when you try to bring it down, how do we help our children? How do I help my kids at different points of time to build that kind of empathy? Now, since this is a seminar which also emphasizes religion, I also am religious, and so I'm a firm Christian. So I do believe that it's very, very helpful sometimes when we can dig back into our faith traditions, because our faith traditions do provide the kind of narrative that help children. I mean, so some of us who have got children who are raised in a faith, I mean, some of these ideas become congruent to them. So for us, I mean, and then from a Christian faith, the notion about God's love for everybody, and it is, I mean, for everyone, right? Doesn't matter what their color is, what their background is, how would God treat them? So as Christians, we teach our children about the story of the Good Samaritan. Who is your neighbor? Your neighbor is really includes everybody who your community may not actually like, but because they are God's creation, you do think about loving them and caring them. So we do help them to transcend beyond just immediate. I guess that's what strengthens us, all of us who have got some kind of faith tradition. Be able to bring that faith tradition and help them to find something concrete. So there we try to help them to understand about the fact that God loves them so much, and in turn, their call is to love other people like how God has loved them. So, when it comes to children, sometimes putting some of that, children do have an awe for what is bigger than themselves. They realize that over time, because there are a lot of things that are not very, very clear, as Christians, we emphasize the idea that God is sovereign, God's in control, and it's important to follow some of those principles and idea. So I think that's been some ways we've been able to build some empathy, emphasizing different parts which come from religious texts. And I do think that children do kind of see that. They look at what is transcendent, what is bigger than themselves, and they do have an awe for that. And then it'll be easier for them to accept some of those principles.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Matthews. Yeah, I think that was very refreshing to hear from you. What I will do right now is actually to pick some of the questions. But before that, we have a comment from Harmeet Singh. So Harmeet Singh, COVID-19 has brought families closer together. As going out become a no-go, families actually started interacting more with each other. Thank you, Mr. Hamid. Yeah, that was that was something that we can resonate. But I'm also I'm also quite concerned because I'm pretty sure there are also other families who are struggling as they knew that in circuit breaker, especially, that you are not able to escape from a house. And perhaps when most people feel that house is a safe space, there are some who felt that, it's not a safe space. It's a space that you're supposed to escape. But I'm going to keep that on hold because we have a different episodes to to focus on that. But thank you for your reflection. We have a question from our Facebook page here. So let me just help to read from Mr. Lee Luo Ming. He said, do positive faith integration help people transcend stressful encounters by enabling them to see a pandemic as an opportunity to grow stronger or to improve their lifestyle? So if I could repeat, do positive faith integration help people transcend stressful encounters by enabling them to see a pandemic as an opportunity to grow stronger or to improve their lifestyle? Yeah. So if I can get Sarabjit, to comment on this.
Hi, sorry, I think I muted myself. You can hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's a really profound question, and I'm gonna take a little bit of time to digest it. But as I do that, I'm actually gonna respond to your comment earlier, Liana, which is very fascinating to me about how our family is gonna think about the new normal and going forward from this point, right? And interestingly, I had this conversation with my family as well. I think I suspect one of the reasons is because my sister is trained in history, So she, as a historian, she made a very interesting comment. She said that history is the toughest teacher for two reasons. Okay, the first reason being because sometimes the scale and the lessons can be very deep, right? When certain events happen. Number two, why it's a tough teacher is because the students forget, which is people like us. Over time, we tend to have a bit of amnesia. I think everybody right now is just holding on at the edge of their seats, waiting for that vaccine to come out. And the biggest fear from that point is, once that vaccine is out, will we become complacent? And I think Bill Gates has said this on various occasions, that actually COVID-19, and actually even PM Lee echoed the same sentiment that COVID-19 is not that major disease that is or virus that's gonna wipe us out, for example, or it's not that significant a threat to humanity as something that we can expect in the future. So these are some of the points where, I personally feel a little unsettled, but I'm hopeful actually that I don't think if we do eventually forget, right, the lessons from COVID-19 or maybe how society should change in a positive way, I'm hopeful that actually it will not happen as quickly or as rapidly as we have seen in previous epidemics. And one of the reasons why I feel this is also the case is because of the way religious organizations have been very important during this time. I think overall, and Dr. Matthews can correct me if I'm wrong, overall in the world today, religiosity is on the increase. I think one of the IPS studies, I think it did reflect that. I'm not too, I can't recall correctly if it's in the case of Singapore or around the world. Religiosity has increased. So those people who are in fact turning to religion a lot more. And what we have observed is actually religious institutions and organizations have in many ways also been leading some of the positive changes that we should seek to aspire towards in society. And I mean, the Sikh community, for example, we've reorganized the way some of the religious activities are conducted, where we don't have to go to the physical space. I think in the churches as well, you have online use of sermons and so on and so forth. And these are all generally positive developments. But now the more profound question, right? Now that I've bought some time to think about it as well as I responded to your earlier comment. Faith transcending, could you just once more repeat that for me? Faith being positive faith integration, yeah.
Does positive faith integration help people transcend stressful encounters by enabling them to see a pandemic as an opportunity to grow stronger or to improve their lifestyle?
I actually have a very short response to that, and this is in no way, to diminish the significance and importance of that question. I think that the truth, at least my take on it, would be it's a very time and space specific thing, right? Again, it alludes to that earlier point I made that in a certain time, yes, you could look at a crisis or a pandemic and you could identify opportunities. But again, humans being humans and the way we behave, if we tend to forget certain lessons, then that it becomes a missed opportunity. So it's a very time and space specific sort of response. And it is, of course, a positive faith integration has quite a bit to inform it. I mean, that will inform it quite a bit. But again, I think most of us would also agree sometimes in really situations where we are tested significantly, I would be the first to admit how my faith can waver, right? Again, so time and space specific and what kinds of situations we are presented with.
Right. Thank you so much, Sarabjit. Master Adrian, do you want to comment for the question?
Yeah, in fact, we're talking about the faith integration. One of the very heartening things I see during the past few months, initially there was a closure of all the religious organizations. So nobody can actually go to the church or even the temples to say prayers and all stuff. So a lot of people actually, there was a missing gap, and then they have this missing gap. And then some of the, very creatively, some of the temples actually started with the online prayers and stuff. So every morning there will be a certain time where they allow all the devotees to start to go online and start to do prayers and all things. So I have also observed during the prayers, some of them actually make some comment like make some well wishes or some even asking for blessing. Some of them actually, we found that they may have lost a job and all that stuff. But one thing very heartening was, we can see that some of the people actually involved in the virtual prayers do also give a good blessing to the other party. It's like wish them well wishes that say, oh, you lost your job. Maybe a few months later or after the COVID, you should be able to find jobs and all that stuff. So it become a very cohesive environment where everyone is integrated. Whether you know each other or not, but it become everyone become friends, and this thing actually become very public, and then it integrated into a society. from the family all the way to the society. So it become a very big family in this perspective. So I should say the new norm, which is the Internet of Things, start to come in. That helps actually do a stronger unity of all the faith itself, which we are belongs to.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Master Adrian, for that. I thought because the question is like, quite deep, and I think it's I want to give the opportunity for all speakers to actually give their comments. So perhaps I can invite Jennifer to respond to Mr. Luo Ming's question earlier. Yeah.
Sure. This is a very, very good question because it helps us to reflect, our faith. How strong is our faith? Yeah. In Buddhism, it always tells us to stay calm and be positive. Do not give in to fear and anxiety. Think of others and help others. In time of difficulties, I think it's an opportunity to practice our compassion and wisdom, to help others and give in the worries and anxiety of our own. So if there's no difficulty, people don't need help. Therefore, it's an opportunity to practice compassion and wisdom. Yeah, to the sentient beings. Sentient beings meaning other people, even our pets, animals around us. And we should build and develop carings for others, put our attention on others' problem. And once we can transfer, right, our attention and care for others, then I will realize that actually my problem is not that big. It helped me to like open up my heart and my eyes start to look around. Who can I care for? Yeah, that's my take.
Right. Thank you, Jennifer. That was very heartwarming. Yeah. If I can, just quickly, if Dr. Matthews, you want to add on based on the question?
Yeah, very quick point. Yeah, I mean, religion, and there's a lot of scientific literature about the power of religion in coping with stressful situations. They've been studying how people with cancer, for instance, turn to religion and find some kind of strength. Now, much of that strength is the ability of religion to provide meaning. When you go through a crisis in this pandemic, for instance, there's an idea there's a meaning that comes from our faith traditions. How do you look at this particular situation? How do we look? So some see it as a test and something that will develop certain kind of inner fortitude or character. Some see it as being a way to restart and reset themselves. So different things that we can begin to find some kind of meaning. When people find meaning in something, that kind of reduces a lot of the stress and the uncertainty. So I do think that our positive faith integration makes a big difference. Thanks.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Matthews. Okay. So we're done with the questions from the Facebook page. So I'm wondering if there's any questions from the participants in the Zoom. Because if we don't have any questions, what we will do is we are going to move on the next segment. Yeah. If you don't have any question, what we'll do is we're going to move on the next segment. So the next segment is actually for all the speakers and the discussant to share their one key takeaways, because we've talked a lot earlier, but I think what is most important is that by the end of the day, what would be that one key takeaway that every one of us can bring, I wouldn't say bring back home, because now all of us are at home, at least most of us, all of us can continuously digest, reflect upon it, and perhaps, it can be a start of our conversation and an initiative that we can look into as a family. So perhaps if I can start with Master Adrian.
Okay. I think I'll end with some encouragement words. May I cite the Tao Te Ching chapter 23. Okay. Strong winds will not last the whole morning, and thunderstorm will not last the entire day. So we should stay hopeful and positive in difficult situations. So have faith in our religion, stay humble, and constantly remind each of the family members and our loved ones and friends also that situation will get better and we will normalize in time to come.
Okay. Thank you so much, Master Adrian. Okay, next, if I can invite Ms. Jennifer.
Yeah, because of the pandemic, after going through, and I think for myself, if ever I have to meet with life crisis or pandemic again, I learned that how I can seek help and self-grow. My mental strength is now stronger than before. And the discussion between all of us here and the questions that our friends have raised, I think it also remind ourselves that we can learn new things. You know, it doesn't matter how old are you, going through digital, because old folks also learn how to go online, right? And we start to take up new skills. So even frustration we have, things are not permanent there. So it's impermanence. So any situation, good or bad, the Buddha remind us that it will not last forever, and we learn to appreciate. So the speakers today have shared with us that we appreciate our family members and all things that happen. Yeah, it widen our hearts. Yeah, that's my takeaway for tonight. Very good sharing. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Mm.
Okay, next, if can have Sarabjit.
Thanks, Diana. Just a couple of points. I thought, you know, initially when I thought of whether I should share some of my personal experiences and anecdotes, you know, going through this crisis, I thought would there be any value and use to that? And I'm actually, or rather, this probably is my own bias because it's my presentation after all. But I feel that at the end of the day, what I experience is not something that people won't be able to resonate with. We all had various struggles, but we all also found ways to manage, in some instances, successfully overcome and even triumph, right? And succeed. This brings me to my second point, because we've had such a shared experience, right, from this crisis, where all of us have been impacted. The degrees may differ, but the fact still remains that all of us have, in one way or another, been impacted by this crisis. And I feel that there's been a lot of convergence even between different communities, whether they are religious, different ways that society organize each other, and these various groups. My sense is that there's a bit more convergence now, that, you know, ultimately we just want to first, of course, do well for ourselves, but also want to see people do well for themselves as well at the same time. And in a lot of our religious communities, we've seen, you know, very proactive ways in which organizations, institutions within these respective religious communities have organized, tried to help others. And these are very encouraging, positive ways, and very profound in terms of, you know, what kinds of impressions they leave on young people, especially since I am, you know, the president of the Young Sikh Association. I think this has been a wonderful way to see how such convergence can lead to significant positive outcomes in society. And on a final note, I would also just like to, again, a short prayer, rather, or the last lines of our Ardas in Sikhism. Nanak Nam Chardi Kala Tere Pane Sarbat Apla. It's really wishing peace and harmony in society and for all. And I really hope that we are able to overcome this together, but not forget too soon the lessons we've learned from COVID-19.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarabjit, for that reminder. It's often easy to, you know, just be grateful and happy and forget all the past. Once, you know, you start to see the light is almost in front of you, just waiting for it to rise. Like, let's say everyone's waiting for phase 3. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Okay, and last but not least, Dr. Matthews.
Thank you, Liana. It was a great session, and I think I really enjoyed everyone and those who asked questions as well. I mean, I think it always reminds us about the fact that we are part of communities. Our family is a community. We've got a broader community, something that we want to emphasize. And in all these communities, for communities to exist, there needs to be love. And there's a big part of the Christian message about love. And I think the scripture that says love never fails. And so that's something that we all should realize that love doesn't fail. Another part of that same scripture says, love thinks the best of others. And so if we can think the best of our neighbor, people around us, even when they may not be doing all the right things, during the COVID season when there were, some people highlighted, some people who were out didn't seem to follow all the measures. But love kind of tries to think and tries to understand what's behind them and what may be their own concern. So love thinks the best of others. So I think if we all think the best of others, I think this will be a great place to live in. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Matthew. That was a very powerful closure, I would have to say. I think it's very heartwarming, to hear the different aspirations and reflection from, the different faith that we have tonight. But before I move further, there is a comment by Bishop Chong Ching Chung. It's really nice to see you here, Bishop. I want to give my affirmation of our government implement very wise, cautious and right policy to address COVID-19 in terms of safety measurement, lockdown, different stages of phases, and also made important decision on financial assistance to our people. With this government policy, it provides very much stability of people's heart, lesser the panic. This enable religion, faith coming in to strengthen our believers' faith. And these also motivate people to think for others who need help. Thank you so much. I think that was a very nice reflection. Yeah, I like the fact that bishops also point out, because a lot of the weightage that we were talking about is from the faith perspective, but we can't really work in silo. It's really heartening to see how the different aspects of the community come together, and also that the government is also very supportive and trying to see how we can, we're not perfect. There are some loopholes here and there, but we try our best to attend to the different sets of the society, and I think that that's very, very hopeful in this time of pandemic. Yeah. So I would like to thank you, everyone, and thank you so much for a great discussion tonight. I hope this will further encourage and spark interest for everyone out there to build and strengthen our faith and family relations as to ensure no one left behind. And to everyone out there, do help us by filling out the evaluation form via the link that we have actually shared in the chat box. And also keep a lookout on our second episode of the next week TikToks, where we'll be talking about family and parenting, multitasking, and holding to faith in times of COVID-19. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.